Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to El Sembrador's weekly devotional time. We're excited that you're here with us this week. This week, we have a couple of different things that we want to share with you. Not next week, but the week after, on October 2nd, our promotional person, Lori, is going to be heading to the United States for a time of promotion. So perhaps you'll see her in your church. You could pray for her travels as we get prepared for that time. It's a big multi-month travel time, and then driving on the roads, especially in late fall, winter, can be kind of complicated, so you can pray for her travels and pray that it will be a successful promotional time for the school as well. We are coming off of our 200th anniversary as a country here in Honduras. We celebrated Independence Day, and it was very successful. We had an online celebration with the students, and that was great. We still don't know what next year is going to look like, but we are extremely hopeful that we are going to be able to have our students on campus again, so you can pray with us about that. Just a short little update on that. Last week, actually, we were extremely happy, especially my wife. My wife is El Sembrador's preschool teacher. We were extremely happy, especially her, because we had Day of the Child. And for Day of the Child, the elementary teachers, at least, get to go and actually see their students. So last week, Ashley and all the other elementary teachers got to go to a local gas station where we know the owner, and they allow us to set up tables and big balloon towers and do this big thing. And parents are welcome to drive through with their kids, almost like a drive up at McDonald's. They drive through there, and a lot of the kids jump out of the car, and they've got to go hug their teacher. The little preschoolers, sometimes the whole pandemic thing doesn't hit them, but Honduras is still under a lot of restriction as far as different rules we have to follow in society to keep us safe from COVID. So it's a big deal for them to be able to leave their homes to come to the gas station, and they get gifts. And Ashley spent several days putting together these fun gift baskets, and so it was really neat for the elementary teachers, at least, to see their students in person. Ashley, being the preschool teacher, she's the one that gets the students. They're the newest. No one else has had them before her, and so she was excited that she actually got to meet her students in person for the first time. This is the first time since February. We're in September, and she hadn't met any of her students in person yet, except for one kid who found her at a church one time and nearly tackled her to the ground. So excited that he got to see his teacher in person. But you can pray for our students. It does affect them to be trapped in their homes a lot. Like I said, we are not under quite as strict of a situation as we once were. Last year at this time, we were still in that. We're coming to the end of that time where we were just completely confined, where we were only allowed out on certain days based on our ID number. We're no longer confined that way. There still is a national curfew. No one can be out after 10 p.m. Different rules like that. We have to wear a mask absolutely everywhere. It's very, it's still, there's a lot of restrictions in the country. So just continue to pray for the situation. Actually, Olancho, the department where El Sembrador is located, is the department that is most hardest hit by COVID right now. It seems that it was one of the last ones to actually have a COVID case confirmed at the beginning of the pandemic, but now it's really hitting us in a big way, and hospitals are full. They've actually, in several cases, have had to turn people away from public hospitals. There aren't enough beds. So please just continue to pray for that situation. I don't know what the situation is like where you live, but that's a little bit about how things are going here. I want to ask you today about what your signature looks like. It's kind of a weird question, but I want to ask you what your signature looks like. And I ask you that question thinking back on my first year in Honduras. I remember in 2010 as a volunteer, I was living and serving in Tegucigalpa. And I remember my host family. I lived with a Honduran family for the first cumulative year and a half, 2 years of my time in Honduras. And I had a host brother. My host brother was quite a bit older than I was, but he was still there at home as that's how they do things here. Until a son or a daughter gets married, they're usually home with their folks. He was at home still, and he and I became pretty good friends. And I remember one day we were out and about doing something, and he had to sign something. And I remember sitting there thinking, all right, we'll sign it. And he starts working on it. He grabs his pen, and he starts working on the signature. And I'm thinking, holy cow, we are sitting here for a long time thinking, what is going on? I'm thinking, what is he working on, a portrait? And I'm thinking, I look over at his signature, and it's completely illegible. There isn't a letter in it. It's like just this bizarre, really cool looking, but strange. markings, just a really cool design that he had come up with. He's like, that's my signature. And I thought, there isn't a single letter in there. I can't even tell there's a name there. And he said, yeah, but that's my signature. And I found out soon after, as I went, I thought, signatures down here must be different than they are in the United States. And they are and they aren't. Most of them are somewhat readable, so it isn't actually that different, but they put a lot of effort into having a big signature. Everyone here has a complex signature, more so in the United States. I remember when I was in 3rd, 4th grade, when I started learning how to write in cursive, they explained that you should write your signature, you should sign your signature in cursive. So I remember learning how to sign my name in cursive, and that was my signature. It's just pretty simple, pretty uncomplicated. However, down here, it seems like they're really fancy. They're really fancy signatures, and they're just very elaborate. And I'm thinking, why are they so fancy? I mean, it's just signing your name. Well, then I kind of found out later that that's kind of the only legal way that people, signing for things is the only legal way to do anything in a lot of different countries. But here, in a country that's got different struggles and things like that, like Honduras does, it's even more important. A person's signature really needs to identify them. It needs to identify them. Not everybody here gets a driver's license. You do get a national ID card, but it's really part of your identification when it comes to signing things. If your signature is recognizable, it's harder to falsify. And in a country where there's lots of theft and robbery and crime in general, it's good to have a complicated signature. And I realized later that they do that on purpose. They do it on purpose, and they're so much more complicated than ones that I remember seeing growing up at home. And I remember thinking, that signature stands for somebody. And last night, or not last, I was really thinking through this topic for today and thinking, again, what is it behind a signature that makes them so unique? Why is it that signatures can be so powerful? And then it got me to thinking, this was several days ago when this topic dawned on me as I was reading through the last chapter of the book of Daniel. I was really sitting there reading about the time that the king in Babylon, he signs the law, and with his signature comes a whole lot of implications. This signature of the law that says, for so much time people are going to pray and only pray to him. They're going to pray to him and they're going to worship him almost as a god, and Daniel doesn't follow that. A king in Babylon at that time, as was similar eventually in Persia, but in Babylon at that time, you could not just reverse a law that you didn't like that you made on accident. A king had to be very careful about what law he signed into law, because once it was done, it was very hard to undo it. It was almost impossible to undo it. In fact, it even says in that chapter that a lot of their laws, when they went back and found that, oh man, I signed that law and I shouldn't have done that, in some cases they couldn't undo the law. They couldn't undo it, and it was really complicated. Imagine how that king felt. This guy that really admired Daniel found out he had signed a law that pretty much condemned his number one guy to death. He felt bad about it. It even says he felt bad about it and tried to figure out a way to get out of it. But his other ministers had trapped him and had trapped Daniel into this terrible situation, and he couldn't. He legally could not reverse the law. His signature was that powerful. Thinking back on the history of the world, well, first I should ask you, what do people think when they see you or when they see your signature? When they see your name signed on a piece of paper, what weight does that signature have? And I got to thinking, as time goes on in this world, it seems like a signature becomes more and more valuable to people with more material possessions that it represents, or with more power, political power, or any kind of power that it represents. That's what gives a signature its weight. That's what gives the signature its uniqueness. It's hard to say exactly what, but you know what I mean. Today, a signature is represented. When we see a signature, we instantly think, oh, well, gee, that person, they signed a check worth big money, or that person, they signed a law into... And I started to think of what are some of the most powerful signatures that exist today. Well, we think of the President of the United States. Usually that signature carries quite a bit of weight, depending on, anybody who's in that office, their signature carries quite a bit of weight. I was looking it up online, most powerful signatures today, and the President of China comes up, that currently their country is very powerful, and so his signature is also extremely powerful. And I also thought, there's a lot of people, and I'm a history buff, so I'm a history fanatic, so I kind of think back at all these different times that a president or somebody else has done something big, and with a stroke of a pen, they changed the face of the earth, or changed maps, or changed just how things were go. We think of in 1803, President Thomas Jefferson officially signed the agreement to purchase Louisiana, do the Louisiana Purchase. With a signature, he purchases 827,000 square miles. It was a huge purchase, and at that time, what's crazy is They actually paid very little money for a lot of that, so it was a big swath of land, just almost doubled the size of the country, with one signature. I mean, that's a powerful signature. That's a lot of weight behind one signature. Then we look, in October 18th, 1867, the U.S. purchased Alaska. The U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia, and it was for in today's money, it was worth $133 million. But if you think about it, think about how huge Alaska is. I was doing some calculations. It roughly comes out to about 37 cents per acre. I don't know about you guys, but that is a deal. I don't know where you live if that's a deal, but I'm thinking, I remember back home in Iowa where all this prime farm ground is going for $12,000, $13,000 an acre. And I remember my great-grandparents hearing the story of them taking out a loan for a 100-acre farm, and it was this much money. I remember thinking, that today wouldn't buy 1 acre of land. They bought Alaska for 37 cents. In today's money, 37 cents per acre. That's crazy. Or we have on September 22nd, 1862, President Lincoln frees over 3.5 million slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation. I mean, think about it. With the stroke of a signature, now not everybody agreed with him. Not everybody wanted to follow that order. But with that order, it was technically, that was the law then. That was the law. He freed all of these people. Momentous times in the history of just our nation. Or if you look at it more internationally speaking, we also see that during World War II, with just one signature, Hitler condemns millions of Jews to their death with the final solution. A signature can go the other way. Signatures can represent a lot of power in just a few little letters on a piece of paper. Does that make sense? Not really, but it does. They have so much power. There's so much power put in people's lives. Their signature can represent a lot. But is that what should truly matter when we think about a person behind a signature? That's kind of where I want to go today, and it sounds a little strange, but I'm headed towards the topic of integrity. When someone looks at your signature, what do you feel they should think about you? When someone thinks about you or looks at your signature or just is reminded of you as a person, what do you want them to think about you? What should they think about you? You, as a Christian, as a believer in Christ, as somebody who loves the Lord, what should they, according to the Lord, think when they hear your name? Does it matter if you have the power to buy 827,000 square miles of territory west of the Mississippi? Does it matter if you have that power? The president in the United States who was responsible for acquiring more territory than any other president is actually a fairly unknown president. James K. Polk is the one who actually acquired more territory for the U.S. during his term. He signed more documents, bringing in more. It was over 1 million square miles. I mean, can you think of that? That's crazy. It was over 1 million square miles of land. It was after the Mexican-American War, and we gained all those states that used to belong to Mexico. He's the one that signed all the things that brought that in. So this relatively unknown president, his signature brought in tons of land, made our country enormous. Is that really what makes a signature or a person valuable in the eyes of God? Not really. And when we think about it in our day and age, I think to myself, well, my signature, if I think of it in terms of power and in terms of wealth, I'm not getting very far. So I don't know about you guys, but sit there and think, is that really what God cares about when he looks at our signature, what we can legally represent, what we can do? I don't think so. When we sit there and think about it, we want them to think about somebody with integrity. We want to think about somebody who when they say that they're a Christian, they believe in the Lord. That person's a Christian, or that person, they love everybody. They've got a servant's heart. Different people, when they see your name signed on a piece of paper, what do they think? I know, we're told and we're taught that, you don't have to worry about your reputation because people are going to make fun of you for being a Christian, and you don't have to worry about it in that sense. But at the same time, in maintaining your reputation as a person of integrity, maintaining who you are as a son or a daughter of Christ is a big deal. It's important. It's a part of who we are. We have to work hard to become that son and daughter that he desires us to be. We have to remember, it doesn't matter if your signature can sign a paper and purchase 1 million square miles of property. It doesn't matter if your signature has the power to spend billions of dollars. It doesn't matter. What matters is what faith lies behind that signature. What faith lies behind you. What is within you that makes a difference? What kind of integrity do you live out in your life? I was talking with Lori and my wife this week. We had a movie night, and we were watching the movie National Treasure, which of course is a national treasure in and of itself, if you agree with our group. Clever little play on words there. Anyway, this movie is a great movie. We hadn't seen it since we were a lot younger, so we were watching it one night, and we got to thinking, they stole the Declaration of Independence, and this was several nights ago, and it's kind of what sparked this message a little bit, and I got to thinking, the signatures on the Declaration of Independence, I started to think, those guys must have had a lot of power. And then I got to thinking, who was the most powerful? I Googled it, because I'm a nerd. And I was thinking, who was the most influential person that signed the Declaration of Independence? And you see people like John Hancock, he's got his name big on there, and he's got other signers on there that are much more famous. And then I come across this fellow who, it was strange, when they were the most powerful, influential people, it was this person and this person, but then when it said the signature that's worth the most was a guy that was relatively unheard of. I'd never heard of him. His name is Button Gwinnett. I don't know about you guys, but I would perhaps strongly recommend that we don't name our children Button. I don't know. That seems like a really odd name for a guy, and grown up his whole life, and his first name is Button. It's literally spelled Button. Anyway, Button... Sorry if any of you have the name Button somewhere in your family or are named Button. But Button Gwinnett was a politician from the South, Georgia, I think. He was a politician from Georgia, and if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But he was this politician who had not actually been a politician for very long. He comes from a rather humble background. He's in the Continental Congress at this time, and he's going to sign the Declaration of Independence. He does actually sign it, and 10 months later, he enters into a duel situation with someone else and dies. 10 months later, he is shot. So this guy pretty much fades away into obscurity, and people see the signature on the Declaration of Independence, Button Gwinnett, and they think, who in the world is Button Gwinnett? It turns out his signature, just a scrap of paper with his name scribbled on it, is worth $755,000. My whole life, I don't think I've ever earned that kind of money, and that just to me is baffling. Who would pay that? But there are people out there that pay to collect the signatures from the Declaration of Independence, and apparently his is only found, they only have found 51 or some copies of his actual signature because he was so obscure. People didn't know anything about him. He was in politics for such a short time, and he died so soon after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But this signature, because it's so rare, it became famous and popular. Maybe that's a reason some of our signatures will be, because we're not really well known. I doubt it. But still, Button Gwinnett, his signature, this just a name scribbled on a piece of paper. But what kind of a man was he? I don't know. Seems kind of strange that he'd get himself into a duel. I know that was kind of a thing back then, but still, it makes you wonder, what kind of a person are these people? What is behind that signature? And today, unfortunately, we see a signature and we immediately associate it with worldly power. Money, and usually those top two, or other things that aren't as important to God. But when you see a name, when you see a signature signed there, what kind of a person is that? What kind of a person are we inside? What is behind our signature? What is behind everything that represents us? When people hear our name or when they see it on Facebook or whatever, do they think, oh man, that person loves the Lord, that person is a true child of God? Or do they think, oh brother, that person's a gossip, oh boy, that person, avoid them, What kind of integrity do we live with in life? Because our integrity does matter to God. When we sit there and we think about the different things that matter to God, we tend to think, okay, yes, we shouldn't let people make fun of us for being a Christian, and if they do, we stand our ground, and it doesn't matter what people say. But our integrity before man does matter to God. When we speak about what kind of a life we live, we're meant to be examples to those around us. And when I think about a biblical example who is wonderful that we can take up for ourselves, I think of Daniel. If you look at the book of Daniel, it's a fascinating book. The book of Daniel is really quite an interesting story. You get this gentleman, this young guy, who is in Judah, and Babylon comes in and invades, and this young guy is one in a very small group of pretty well-educated young men who are going to be hauled off to Babylon. So that's trauma number one. He has lived a life and a half. He's living in his homeland. He experiences the loss of everything he knows to be dear in his heart. He loses his homeland, everything. I can't imagine. I live here in Honduras. This is what I consider my home. But I'm from a small town in rural Iowa. That to me will always be in my heart, my home. That's always going to be something, my first home. The most close and dear place to my heart is that tiny little corner of the world in northwest Iowa where I graduated with a high school class of 30 people, and everybody knows everybody's business, and we live there and we farm, and that's where I'm from. It's part of me, and I love that. But I can't imagine losing that. Some of you, perhaps you've lost your home, but that's what Daniel did. An invading army comes in and they capture him, they destroy his homeland, and they haul him off. They haul him off and they plant him there. But the strange thing is this guy, you have to realize how unique his story is and how much so God was truly with him as he ascended through the ranks of the Babylonian government. Think about it. He is being faithful to his God in the midst of a completely pagan government. Very few, if any, other Jews are in that group, or people that truly are following God with a 100%. Maybe there were a few and we just don't know about them. I'm not sure, but he ascends through the ranks in the Babylonian government and becomes very, very popular, especially with the king. The king of Babylon at this time was massively popular and extremely powerful. His signature carried a lot of weight as compared to this obscure young man coming in from Judah who we know next to nothing about. He's actually a prisoner in Babylon. He's put into a small government position and he slowly, well, not slowly, actually rather quickly, rises through the ranks. And he becomes one of those, I don't know, viceroys, I guess in some versions they call it, or very powerful men. When the king in Babylon decides he's going to structure his government a certain way, he puts Daniel in this group of men that have control, vast control and power over major regions in his kingdom. This guy who is actually not Babylonian. He's not a Babylonian, he's not originally from there. That's not his heart, that's not his culture, that's not him. But he's in their government and he ascends through the ranks so well that he ends up being extremely close to the most powerful person on earth at the time. And he gets power. His signature all of a sudden, he could do pretty much whatever he wants. At one point it says in Daniel 6 that he gets to the point where he's the second guy. He's extremely, extremely successful. This is like Joseph in Egypt level successful. Like God took him from being this prisoner to being the second most powerful person in Babylon. I mean, that's pretty impressive, really, what God can do. He does this with Daniel's life, but all throughout the entire thing, what sticks out to me the most at this point in history, so many thousands of years after Daniel exists, is not the fact that he was probably rich. It doesn't talk about how rich he was, but in that position, he had to have had wealth. It doesn't talk about how rich he was. It does mention his authority and the power that he has, but it doesn't dwell on it. It doesn't talk about orders that he gave or military things that he did or anything like that. It just talks about his faith in God. That's what comes out in this book, is his incredible faith in God. In the midst of this extremely successful rise in power, he never loses sight of his faith in God. There were so many opportunities to do so. I mean, think about it. He's in the middle of Babylon, an extremely rich, very pagan, but extremely rich financially speaking, educationally speaking. He was reaping the benefits of this empire that wasn't even his. He is raking in the benefits, and he could have focused on himself and on his own life and on his own everything that is him. He had political power. He could give power, and soldiers obeyed him. He was I don't know if he was best friends, but he was extremely close with this extremely powerful king. So close to him that he has such an impact. When this king gives an order that everybody for so much time is going to obey him or to pray to him, Daniel doesn't do it. It says here in Daniel chapter 6, I'm going to read it. Daniel chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. At this time, let's see. Yeah. We'll just read chapter 6 and go forward for a little ways. It pleased Darius, King Darius, to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. So first thing he gets set above is instantly this foreigner, prisoner, originally started out, is now in this top little powwow, 4 people, with 3 guys with the king, and he is governing these governors. So if you think about it, this is a huge empire. There are hundreds of thousands of people, if not 1 million or 2 million or whatever, in this empire, and he's governing them. He's a part of 4 people that are in charge of pretty much everything. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. That part impresses me. It speaks to his character. It speaks to his integrity. These other satraps that were looking for dirt on Daniel, they had connections. They had money. They had power of their own, and I'm sure they dug deep to look for anything they could find against Daniel. They were desperate to get rid of this guy that was in a position they thought should be theirs. It was probably the number 1 task on their list for a good chunk of their lives, trying to get rid of Daniel. But no matter how far they dug, no matter how much of their power in this world they used, they could not find anything against Daniel. That speaks volumes as to who Daniel was as a man, and as to who he was as a son of God, as a faithful person who's not going to fall aside no matter how rich or powerful he becomes in this world. He wasn't going to abandon his God. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Well, there's the trap. There's the trap, and it's set. And the king, it says here, "Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing, and he signed it. Once that was happened, he couldn't go back even himself and repeal this law. It's been written, he signed it, it's set in stone, and Daniel is not going to give up his prayer life. Daniel is at the pinnacle of Babylonia, of this Persian and Mede society. He is at the cima, as they say in Spanish, the summit of power. He's right there next to the king. He could have spent his entire life living in the lap of luxury. All he had to do was agree not to pray to a god. In this particular law, he's not even saying that he has to pray to this king. He's just saying that you shouldn't pray to another god. It doesn't say you have to pray to him. It said you should only pray to him if you do pray. He just decides, I'm not going to spend a month or even any time not praying. I'm going to pray, and I'm going to pray to my God. He doesn't stop. He doesn't care about his power. He doesn't care about his riches. He doesn't care about his wealth. He keeps praying to God. What happens? They trap him. They know he's not going to stop. He prays for hours a day. He's got an extremely disciplined prayer life. They trap him. They take him before the king, and the king is remiss. He's sitting there, and he's really upset. He doesn't realize what he's done until it's too late. He says, "This law that I've signed, I've condemned my favorite guy. I've condemned the guy that I had planned to put over my entire kingdom." He has no choice. He sends his guards to capture Daniel. They throw him into the lion's den, and of course we know what happens. When this happens, Daniel is not some young man, as they point out in the paintings. In some art today, you see this super well-fit, extremely muscular guy in the lion's den, ferocious lions, facing, he looks like a warrior. He was actually rather getting up there in years. He was probably closer into 70s, perhaps beyond, by the time he's in the lion's den. And this older gentleman who doesn't have as much strength as maybe he once had at one time, who had just recently been extremely powerful and wealthy, is sitting there facing these lions, and he's not worried. He's not worried because he knows that his God's going to protect him. He prays to his God daily. He's not going to give up his faith in God for anything. Nothing is more important to him than his God. What do people think? What do you think? What is true about you? What is true about you and your spiritual integrity? What are you willing to give up, or what are you willing to never give up for your faith? That's my question. Does it matter to you if your signature has money and power behind it, or does it matter to you if you have God behind it? I know for a fact that in my life, I don't have massive wealth to sign a signature and boom, big things happen. I don't necessarily have that. But what I know that I've got is my faith in God. And I hope that's true for you guys. I hope that when you're sitting there and someone reads your signature or someone thinks about you, they'll think, oh man, that guy, he believes in the Lord. He's a great person, and he's willing to help out anybody, or she's always there for that person. Hopefully your signature carries more of God's weight than the world's weight. Daniel recognized the importance of God's weight over the world's weight. He did his best job in the positions that God trusted him with. But he knew that they were nothing in compared to his place in God's kingdom. There was nothing that could surpass that. No earthly position could surpass that. This man was was made of complete integrity. When we look at a particular chapter, and I know I'm going kind of long, but when we look at a particular chapter in Titus chapter 2, it gives us a series of verses that actually I've used in my life as a sort of an example or a scale of different things a list of things I need to remember as I am seeking out living a life of integrity. Titus chapter 2. And if we actually go to that passage, I won't read the whole thing, but it actually gives a list. If you're an older man, if you're a younger man, if you're a woman, if you're a slave, all these different people have different things they need to think about when they consider integrity. But really, all of those things, no matter what category they are, you could pull them out and make one general list to follow, no matter who you are. It's a list that applies to lots of different people, and they're things that please God. Speak out on what is solid doctrine. That's the first thing it says. Teach people true doctrine. That is so important today. When doctrine is being shaken, it's being destroyed, it's being pulled apart, and we're pulling further and further away from what really worshiping God is in its truest sense. Men and women are trying to turn themselves into who control what doctrine should be. And because of that, we're seeing a distorted view of the gospel today. Be a person that's willing to stand up for true doctrine no matter what other people say. Daniel would have. He stood there in front of his king and said, "What you've given me doesn't matter over my God." What are you going to stand up and say if someone questions you and your doctrinal choices? Be temperate or calm and reasonable. Then it says, worthy of respect, self-controlled, sound in faith, sound in love, sound in endurance. Be reverent in the way you live. God first in everything. Do not be slanderers, or say, don't go after gossip. Do not be addicted to wine or any other addicted substance that can harm you. Love your spouse and your children. Be busy, but in the sense that don't be lazy. Don't be lazy and keep working hard. Be kind. Be an example for those coming up in the next generation. Humbly submit to those in authority over you that God places there. Of course, you're not going to follow anything that's immoral, but you're going to respect those people that are put in positions of authority over you. I think on here, one of the things that we need to remember the most is that our integrity will be reflected down to the generation who comes after us. It will be. Daniel is at the top of the Babylonian Persian Mede Empire, and his integrity is still shining down millennia later. What is that going to mean in your family? How is it 3 or 4 generations from now, are your relatives going to remember you? What will the stories say? Oh man, he was a wild one. Or are they going to say, man, you know what? He never missed a Sunday in church. Despite whatever issues might have happened, he loved his God. And what type of integrity are you made of? I hope that integrity is a huge part of your walk with God, because if it's not, your signature is not going to mean much. Your signature is not going to mean much. I don't care if you can sign a check that signs away millions of dollars. I don't care if you can sign a paper that gives soldiers orders to go throughout the world and cause havoc. I don't know what it is that your signature can do according to the world's power, but I hope when it comes to God, it means something. I hope there's integrity behind your signature. I hope there's integrity in your heart. Do everything you can to live a life of integrity. Don't ever give anyone else reason to call you out and say, hey, look at that person. Look what a failure they are. When anyone comes against you and tries to hold things against you or tries to destroy you, let your reputation be that where, you know what, you're a person of integrity. Let them dig as deep as the satraps did with Daniel and find nothing. That should be our goal. Live a life that is full of integrity for God. That's what I've got for you today. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for this chance that you give us to serve you, Lord. Thank you for examples like Daniel. Daniel climbed the ranks in the empire where he was living, and it wasn't even his empire. He climbed the ranks there because you allowed him to. You pulled him up through those ranks and put him in a place of great influence. You let the world know that, you know what, this is a man who loves me above all else. I'm going to use him as an example to the world. Thank you for the example of integrity that he is to all of us. I pray that we could all try and live up to Daniel's example. The fact that he was a man of integrity, help us be like him. Where worldly power, worldly wealth means nothing to us compared to who we are in your kingdom. Use us to complete your work in this world, Lord. This life is so short. Let us use it for the growth and for the benefit of your kingdom, Lord. Thank you for everybody that's listening today. Bless every single person out there. I pray, Lord, that this message would reach whoever needs to hear it, and that it could be a blessing for others, and that it could extend beyond and just impact your kingdom. Let us be people of 100% godly integrity. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.